Tonight, under a sky brushed with the faintest traces of twilight, the wind carries whispers across the frozen expanse of the northern river. The ice, thick and unyielding for years, has been both barrier and boundary, keeping tribes apart, keeping old wounds from reopening, yet also keeping hope at a distance. Tonight, we will step onto that ice ourselves, feeling its brittle crunch beneath our feet, sensing the tension that hums in the frosty air, and discovering what happens when courage, trust, and the quiet desire for peace collide. Before we embark, take a moment to settle in. Perhaps you're watching from a cozy corner in the U.S., where evening shadows stretch long over the land, or maybe in Europe, where the night drifts slowly across the cities and villages, and the world feels hushed. Wherever you are, in Japan, Africa, or somewhere between, notice the time of day and let it remind you to breathe deeply, relax, and prepare to wander slowly through this frozen, magical land. Like the river that holds secrets beneath its ice, tonight's story asks for patience. Like, subscribe, and comment to share your thoughts, and ready yourself to follow the journey of two tribes standing at the edge of change. Let the warmth of your blanket, the softness of your pillow, and the quiet around you become part of the story. Prepare your senses for the cold wind, the creaking ice, and the fragile hope that threads through it all. Now, with your mind settled and your heart open, let us step carefully onto the first frozen stretch and begin the tale. The morning broke slowly over the frozen river, pale light filtering through clouds that hung heavy and low, softening the edges of the distant hills. The air was sharp, tinged with the scent of ice and pine, and each breath came like a small, crisp reminder of the winter's quiet dominance. On either side of the river, the two tribes stirred in their settlements, small clusters of smoke rising from stone hearths, curling into the pale sky like tentative greetings across the distance. From the north, the Greycliff tribe moved with careful, deliberate steps along the river's edge. Their furs, thick and heavy, muffled the sounds of their approach, but the faint creak of leather boots on frozen ground marked their passage. Children clung to their mothers, eyes wide with curiosity, as elders spoke softly of the river's history, how it had once been a place of shared celebration, now a place of careful suspicion. Each footfall was measured, each movement respectful of the fragile boundary the ice enforced. On the southern bank, the Frostspire tribe mirrored the stillness, their own fires sputtering against the chill. The elders, faces lined like the bark of ancient trees, whispered about the day the ice might break. Not literally, they said, but in meaning, the day when old grudges might yield, when the river could become a bridge instead of a barrier. The younger members listened, not fully understanding the weight of generations, yet feeling the anticipation in the cold air, a quiet tension as palpable as frost on the river's surface. Across the ice, the river stretched like a silver ribbon, reflecting the dim light, smooth yet deceptive, hiding fissures beneath its polished surface. A lone raven traced the horizon, wings slicing the sky in slow arcs, a dark mark against the pale morning. Its call was sharp, lonely, yet carried a strange note of warning, as if nature itself held its breath for what might come. The tribes did not yet meet. Distance held them in a careful, fragile balance, yet each knew that today would not pass as quietly as the last. And beneath the surface of the ice, currents flowed unseen, carrying whispers of past battles, lost friendships, and the possibility of something entirely new. As the wind moved across the river, it seemed to hum a message. The ice may crack, and when it does, everything will shift. In this moment of waiting, there was both beauty and tension, the serene hush of snow-laden trees, the soft creak of distant structures settling in the cold, the sharp, clear notes of a woodpecker against the frozen trunks. Every sound felt amplified in the still air, yet the silence between them was louder, a lull that demanded attention and reflection. And so, as the sun edged higher, though still pale and distant, the tribes began to sense the subtle stirrings of change. No words had passed, no gestures made, yet the frozen river held a promise that the day the ice broke would not be ordinary, and that both fear and hope would walk hand in hand. The wind carried a faint tang of thawing snow, a subtle promise that the rigid cold was beginning to yield to the slow pull of sunlight. Along the northern bank, the Gray Cliff tribe stirred more deliberately now, as if sensing that the day demanded attention. Their movements were quiet, almost ritualistic, women brushing snow from their furs, men adjusting the straps of sleds, elders tracing patterns in the frost with fingers stiff from the cold. Each small action was purposeful, a way to keep the body warm while keeping the mind steady, grounded, and alert. At the river's edge, the ice sparkled in muted shades of gray and silver, catching what little light the morning offered. Small cracks snaked along its surface, faint but telling, like the first notes of a song no one yet understood. Children peered over the edge, sticks tapping gently, sending soft echoes through the hollow spaces beneath. The ice was alive to them, in a way the elders no longer felt. It trembled under their light taps, hinting at strength and fragility intertwined. From the south, frost-spire watchers gathered along their frozen bank. Cloaked in layered furs of muted whites and blues, they crouched to examine the ice, running fingers along its surface, tracing the faint fissures. Their breath fogged the air, rising like miniature clouds that danced for a moment before vanishing. It was a quiet ritual of observation, a means of measuring both danger and opportunity, of understanding how the river itself might shape the events to come. And though the tribes remained apart, an unspoken awareness vibrated between them, carried by the wind. It was as though the river had ears, listening to the soft footfalls, the whispers of elders, the tentative laughter of children. Every movement, every sound, was amplified across the ice, yet no one reached across, not yet. There was anticipation, a delicate waiting, suspended like frost on a branch. As the morning grew, the first signs of activity began to punctuate the stillness. A lone hunter from Graycliff stepped onto the ice, carefully testing the surface with a long pole. The ice groaned faintly beneath his weight, a low, resonant sound that traveled across the river. Frost-spire heads lifted, eyes narrowing, and a hushed ripple of conversation passed among them. They were silent observers, yet their hearts quickened. Something was shifting, and both tribes knew that the day's true journey had quietly begun. Even the forest beyond the river seemed aware of the moment. Snow-laden branches bowed under their weight. Small creatures scuttled cautiously, leaving tiny tracks that crisscrossed in the white expanses. And the distant mountains glimmered faintly, their peaks etched in frost and sun. The world held its breath, poised on the cusp of change, where tension and beauty intertwined, and where every sound, every movement felt magnified in the hush of winter. And in that fragile silence the tribes felt it, the subtle pull of inevitability, a quiet urging that soon, very soon, the river's ice would carry not just the weight of snow and stone, but the fragile, trembling hope of reconciliation. The day deepened slowly. stretching its pale light over the frozen river like a soft silvery veil. Each breath hung in the air, visible as a fleeting mist, and the cold had begun to settle into a rhythm, wrapping every sound in a gentle hush. From the northern bank, the Gray Cliff elders moved toward the river's edge, their footsteps deliberate, cushioned by the fresh layer of frost that had settled overnight. Their eyes scanned the ice with quiet intent, noting the hairline fractures and subtle shifts that only years of experience could reveal. Beside them, the younger members carried small bundles of wood, their hands red and stiff, yet steady. They placed the wood in careful stacks near the water, preparing fires meant not for warmth alone, but as markers, a gentle signal that they had crossed the first threshold of courage by approaching the ice at all. The scent of pine and smoke mingled with the crisp chill, drifting faintly across the river, where frost spire watchers inhaled it with both curiosity and caution. On the southern bank, Frostspire's own preparations mirrored this rhythm, though quieter, more deliberate. They arranged stones in neat circles, small fires carefully stoked, so their smoke curled lazily into the sky. Elders whispered advice, younger ones mimicked the gestures, and all of them shared a collective sense of wonder. The ice between them was not merely a barrier, it was a canvas, a fragile space where the past and the possibility of peace could meet. Across the river, the ice itself seemed to respond. Cracks spread slowly, almost imperceptibly, like veins tracing the body of the frozen river. The sound was a faint groan, so subtle it might have been imagined, yet it carried far, reaching both tribes in soft, vibrating pulses. Every eye turned toward it, every ear strained. For the first time, the ice did not feel static. It felt alive, aware, and listening. The children, who had been cautiously observing the adults, began to step closer to the river's edge. One small girl from Gray Cliff knelt and pressed a gloved hand to the ice, feeling its cold pulse beneath her fingertips. Across the way, a boy from Frostspire did the same, his nose nearly touching the surface, eyes wide with quiet awe. Though they were separated by a wide, frozen expanse, a subtle connection sparked between them, a shared curiosity that neither tribe could yet articulate. And in that shared moment, the river held a breath of its own, the wind whispering through the distant pines like a lullaby, carrying hints of what might come. The tribes could feel it, a fragile thread linking north to south, old to young, fear to hope. It was small, almost invisible, yet potent, a quiet reminder that even the coldest divides could shift, given patience, courage, and the willingness to step onto uncertain ground. The sun hovered low, casting long shadows across the ice, stretching the day into a slow, languid rhythm. Each sound, the crackle of fires, the distant cry of a bird, the soft crunch of boots on frost, seemed magnified in the stillness, pulling every listener deeper into the fragile intimacy of the moment. And in that intimacy, a subtle promise stirred that the river might one day carry more than frost and fear. It might carry the beginnings of understanding. The wind shifted slightly as midday approached, carrying a softer note through the trees that lined the riverbanks. The air was still crisp, but there was a hint of warmth beneath the sun's pale light, as if the earth itself was coaxing life into movement. On the Gray Cliff side, the elders began to hum low, steady chants, the sound vibrating softly through the frozen ground. Their voices were slow and measured, almost a meditation, meant to calm the young ones and remind the tribe of the river's ancient memory, the times it had nurtured life, the times it had borne witness to conflict. A subtle ripple of sound traveled across the ice. Frostspire ears perked, not in alarm, but in recognition. They too had rituals for the day, quiet gestures of preparation, a brush of snow from robes, the careful stacking of stones, the gentle tracing of marks in the frost with long, slender sticks. Every movement was mindful, steeped in centuries of tradition, an acknowledgment that the frozen river held stories far older than either tribe could claim. The ice beneath them creaked faintly, the soft groaning of trapped water responding to the sun's subtle warmth. It was a sound that made the air feel heavier and lighter all at once, a paradox that seemed to wrap the watchers in its rhythm. Children pressed closer to the banks, faces flushed with cold and excitement, watching the elders with reverent attention. A young Graycliff girl traced the edge of a crack with her fingertip, marveling at the delicate patterns, as though she could feel the ice breathing beneath her touch. On the opposite side, a boy from Frostspire tilted his head, eyes wide, sensing that the river itself was a living bridge between them. From a distance, the wind carried faint echoes of birdsong, the delicate trills that pierced the winter quiet like silver threads. Snowflakes, loosened by the subtle warmth, drifted lazily through the air, catching in hair, on fur, and along the glimmering ice, adding a gentle, almost magical shimmer to the scene. The river reflected these flakes in soft, distorted patterns, each ripple a fleeting painting, a reminder that beauty often existed in fleeting, fragile moments. The elders from both tribes spoke to their kin in hushed tones, recounting stories of the river when it had been a place of gathering, when the ice had not been a barrier, but a canvas for celebration and trade. The younger members listened, hearts stirred, not fully understanding, yet feeling the weight and the wonder in equal measure. There was a gentle hope threading through every word, as if the stories themselves could guide the tribes toward a day unlike any before. As the sun dipped slightly toward its winter arc, the ice seemed to hum in quiet anticipation. A subtle tension threaded through the scene, not fear exactly, but a readiness, a poised stillness that suggested the world itself knew something was about to change. And in the silence that followed, the first tentative thought arose in both tribes. Perhaps today the ice would carry more than snow and frost. Perhaps it would carry the fragile beginnings of trust. A soft hush settled over the river as the afternoon light stretched the shadows of distant trees across the ice. The world felt suspended, balanced between cold and warmth, silence and sound, hesitation and movement. On the Graycliff side, the elders began to stir more actively, moving slowly toward the center of the riverbank where the ice was thickest. Their hands carried small bundles of incense, the fragrant smoke curling upward in delicate spirals, mingling with the mist rising from the frozen surface. The scent was sharp and earthy, grounding the young ones nearby while filling the quiet air with a sense of ritual, of sacred purpose. Across the way, Frostspire watchers observed in mirrored motion. The women laid cloths over stones, creating gentle markers along the river's edge, while the men traced patterns in the frost with long wooden staffs, careful not to disturb the fragile ice. Their breath rose in puffs, swirling like miniature clouds that drifted toward the center of the river, mingling invisibly with the Graycliff smoke. It was a slow, deliberate dance of preparation, each movement measured and meaningful, a quiet testament to the reverence each tribe held for the frozen river. The children, sensing the change in rhythm, pressed closer to the ice, the cold nibbling at their cheeks and ears. One small gray cliff boy tapped lightly on the surface with a slender stick, watching the ripple travel outward. The vibration carried far across the wide expanse, and on the frost spire side, a girl bent low to place her hand flat against the ice. The subtle shiver beneath her palm mirrored the boy's tap, a delicate, unspoken conversation carried by frost and crystal. In that moment, the river seemed less like a barrier and more like a living thread connecting them, fragile yet unmistakably present. From above, a lone hawk traced lazy circles in the sky, its shadow briefly skimming the ice before moving on. The sound of distant trees groaning under the weight of snow punctuated the quiet, each small creak a reminder that even in stillness the frozen world was alive. The tribes felt it. Every rustle of fur, every whisper of wind, every faint crack in the ice became part of a growing awareness. The river itself seemed to pulse, waiting, breathing, inviting the first tentative steps towards something unknown yet inevitable. The elders spoke quietly among themselves, exchanging words that were almost too soft for the wind to carry. They spoke of patience, of courage, of the fragile hope that could grow if approached with care. The younger ones listened intently, absorbing the rhythm of speech and gesture, the subtle lesson that sometimes the most powerful movements were the slowest, the most deliberate. And in that slow, deliberate moment, the river held its own breath. The ice beneath was still, yet alive with the whisper of currents far below, carrying the memory of winters past and the quiet possibility of change. As the sun dipped lower and the shadows grew longer, both tribes felt the subtle stirring of something neither frost nor fear could contain. The ice might crack, yes, but in that break there was promise. The light waned gradually, softening the edges of the river into muted shades of gray and silver. A gentle hush wrapped the world in quiet reverence, broken only by the subtle creaks of ice shifting beneath its own weight and the distant rustle of snow-laden branches. On the gray cliff side, the elders now moved closer to the water, their furs brushing against one another with the soft swishes, while the younger members followed at a careful distance, carrying bowls of water to be poured over the ice, a ritual of respect, a gesture meant to honor the frozen river as both barrier and bridge. Across the ice, Frost Spire mirrored the solemnity with their own delicate rites. Women sprinkled fine snow into shallow patterns, letting it drift gently onto the ice, marking symbolic paths that led from their bank toward the center. Men knelt quietly, tracing long, slow lines in frost with sticks, patterns that told stories of past winters, of ancestors, of lessons learned, and mistakes remembered. Every movement was deliberate, almost reverent, as if disturbing the ice without care could undo generations of memory and anticipation. The children, sensing the gravity of the moment, huddled closer to the edges. One small gray cliff girl knelt on her heels, pressing her gloved hands against the frozen surface. She felt a faint tremor run beneath her palms, a vibration so subtle it might have been imagined, yet undeniable. On the opposite side, a Frostspire boy leaned close, eyes wide, tracing the same fissure with a finger, marveling at the way the ice seemed to respond as though it recognized their attention. For a brief, fleeting instant, they were connected, two young hearts, sensing the fragile thread that tied the river's banks together. A soft gust of wind carried the scent of pine and smoke, mingling across the ice like a gentle bridge between the tribes. Each inhalation was a reminder of the world beyond the frozen river, of the forests that held life in quiet abundance, of the mountain standing sentinel in the distance, and of the river itself, still and patient, waiting to bear witness. A hawk's cry echoed faintly, sharp and distant, and the tribes felt it like a punctuation, a note of warning, yet also of promise. The elders spoke now, in whispers low enough for only the nearest ears to hear. They spoke of courage, of humility, of the slow unfolding of trust. The younger ones listened, absorbing every syllable with a quiet intensity, understanding that patience would be as important as bravery in the moments to come. The ice beneath their feet held the weight of all of this, the anticipation, the care, the fragile hope, and seemed to acknowledge it in faint, subtle creaks, like a sigh from deep below. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the glimmering expanse, the river seemed to hold its breath along with the tribes. The air was alive with expectation, each sound magnified in the quiet, the rustle of firs, the whisper of snow settling, the crackle of distant fire. The frozen river had become more than ice. It had become a threshold, a space where fear and hope, past grievances and future possibilities, intertwined in the slow, deliberate unfolding of a day that promised to change everything. The sun hung low, a pale disk barely piercing the winter haze, and its light stretched across the frozen river in a silver haze that softened all edges. The air seemed to thicken with quiet expectation, carrying a scent of ice, pine, and faint smoke from distant fires. On the gray cliffside, the elders moved in unison, forming a slow, deliberate line along the river's edge. Their boots crunched softly on the frost, each step a meditation, each breath a careful acknowledgment of the day's significance. Younglings followed, mirroring their elders with tentative grace, sensing that every movement mattered in ways they were only beginning to understand. Across the river, the frost-spired tribe responded in a mirrored harmony. The elders spoke in hushed tones, their voices soft but deliberate, instructing their young on the proper placement of stones and the gentle scattering of snow to mark the ice's natural fissures. Their hands were steady, their gestures flowing like water frozen into mid-motion. The children watched, wide-eyed and attentive, learning not only the ritual, but also the silent language of respect, patience, and anticipation. The ice beneath the tribe seemed almost to pulse with life. Faint cracks shimmered, glittering in the diffused light, and small tremors traced long, delicate paths beneath the surface. The vibration was subtle, imperceptible to anyone who did not listen carefully, yet it carried across the river like a message. The frozen boundary was alive, aware, and perhaps even encouraging the cautious steps of both tribes. The elders noticed it first, exchanging quiet, knowing glances, and the young ones followed, feeling the same tremor without understanding its full significance. Children on both sides began to experiment gently, tossing small stones onto the ice, watching the delicate shivers radiate outward. One Graycliff boy laughed softly as the stone skipped lightly, sending a ripple that shimmered across the frost. On the Frostspire side, a girl mirrored his actions with a tiny clump of snow, sending her own ripple to meet the first. For a brief moment, separated only by the frozen expanse, the two ripples intertwined, and the children shared a fleeting, wordless connection, a small, tender bridge across the ice that the elders could see but chose to leave undisturbed. The wind whispered through the nearby pines, carrying the faint sound of movement, of life, of anticipation. Even the distant mountains seemed attentive, their peaks glowing faintly under the pale sun, standing as silent witnesses to the delicate choreography unfolding below. The frozen river, once a simple barrier, had become a stage, a living canvas for hope, courage, and tentative connection. As the day stretched slowly onward, the elders spoke again, softer now, almost to themselves, sharing stories of the river's past and the fragile promise of its future. Their words wove through the air like threads, binding the actions of young and old, north and south, past and present. And in that hush, in the stillness between breaths, both tribes felt it. The ice was listening, the river was alive, and the first stirrings of change had begun to take root. The afternoon light softened further, turning the snow and ice into a muted canvas of grays and silvers. The frozen river, once seemingly static and eternal, began to reveal its subtle restlessness. Faint cracks spread like delicate veins beneath the surface, catching the pale light and glimmering with a soft, fragile beauty. On the gray cliffside, the elders paused, their hands hovering over the ice, sensing the gentle tremors that whispered of life beneath the frost. Each breath they took seemed to draw the cold more deeply into their lungs, yet the warmth of anticipation lingered in their chests, steady and patient. Young members of the tribe moved quietly along the edge, carrying small, carefully carved wooden bowls filled with snow and water. They poured it slowly onto the ice, letting it seep into the cracks, watching as the fragile frost absorbed their offerings. It was a ritual of patience, a gesture that spoke of respect, hope, and the acknowledgement that the river was not just a physical boundary, but a living entity, attentive to the intentions of those who approached it. On the frost spire bank, the pattern was mirrored. Elders traced long lines in the snow with careful precision, whispering instructions that carried the weight of generations. The children crouched low, following their guidance with tender care, their fingers leaving faint impressions in the frost. The subtle contrast of movement and stillness, the deliberate gestures of humans against the quiet unrest of the ice, created a rhythm that seemed to pulse across the river, uniting the two tribes in an unspoken dialogue. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine, smoke, and the faint metallic tang of frozen water. Each inhalation was sharp, refreshing, almost electric in its clarity. The ice responded with soft groans and delicate cracks, a low, vibrating chorus that seemed to harmonize with the hushed whispers of the elders. Even the children noticed the sounds now, their eyes widening in awe as they felt the faint pulse beneath their fingertips, a heartbeat of frost and memory that connected north to south. A gray raven wheeled high above, its wings slicing through the crisp air, and the sound of its cry carried across the frozen expanse. The tribes paused for a moment, letting the note linger in the stillness. It was a reminder of the wider world beyond the ice, a signal that the day was moving forward, and that nature itself was watching, patient and attentive. As the light waned toward early evening, shadows deepened and stretched across the river, drawing long, soft lines that connected both banks. The elders spoke in quiet, reverent tones of patience, of courage, of the fragile trust that must be nurtured before steps could be taken across the ice. And in the silence that followed, the children felt it too, a subtle promise, almost imperceptible, that the frozen river might one day carry not only footsteps, but reconciliation, connection, and hope. Evening descended gradually, draping the frozen river in muted shades of lavender and silver. The air grew quieter still, carrying only the faint whisper of wind and the occasional groan of ice adjusting beneath its own weight. On the gray cliff bank, the elders moved closer to the river's edge, their forms steady, deliberate, each step measured with care. The young followed silently, feeling the cool bite of air on their cheeks and the soft crunch of frost underfoot. In this hush, every sound seemed magnified: the distant crack of a branch, the faint murmur of the river beneath the ice, the rhythmic tapping of a child's stick against the frozen surface. Across the river, Frost Spire mirrored the solemnity. Fires burned low, their smoke curling lazily into the twilight sky, adding a golden haze to the cold silver of ice. Children huddled near the warmth, glancing across at the gray cliffside with a mix of curiosity and cautious excitement. Elders guided them with soft words, steady hands, and patient gestures, reminding them that the river demanded care and respect, and that every movement could carry meaning beyond the simple act itself. A gentle tremor ran through the ice, subtle but undeniable. The elders paused, eyes narrowing, sensing the faint vibration that traveled from one side of the river to the other. The children felt it too, a tiny thrill that ran through their fingertips and toes, a reminder that the frozen expanse was alive in its own quiet way. A gray cliff boy pressed a gloved hand against a small crack, and a Frost Spire girl mirrored him across the river, their fingers tracing similar lines as if in silent conversation. It was a tender moment of connection, fragile yet unmistakable, hinting at the possibility that the distance between them could one day be crossed. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the snow-laden branches behind the tribes, carrying the faint scent of pine, smoke, and earth. A single raven glided overhead, its wings beating slowly against the pale sky, casting fleeting shadows across the glimmering ice. The sound of its distant cry echoed softly, a reminder of the wild world beyond the frozen river, patient and eternal, observing the small, careful steps being taken below. As twilight deepened, the elders began a soft chant, low and steady, carrying across the ice like a gentle vibration. The words were old, worn with time, full of reverence and caution, and they resonated with the rhythm of the river itself. The children leaned closer, mesmerized, absorbing the cadence, the meaning, and the subtle power in the quiet ritual. For a fleeting instant, the river seemed to hold its breath alongside them, and both tribes felt the delicate promise in the air. The ice was not merely a barrier, but a space where trust, patience, and hope could quietly take root. Night began to settle gently over the frozen river, wrapping the world in a soft, silvery darkness. The pale glow of the moon skimmed across the ice, turning it into a mirror of muted light and casting long, delicate shadows that stretched from tree to tree and from bank to bank. On the gray cliffside, the elders gathered closer around small fires, the amber glow flickering over their lined faces and thick furs. The children sat nearby, knees drawn to chests, mesmerized by the quiet dance of flame against the silent expanse of snow and ice. Across the river, the Frost Spire tribe mirrored the intimacy of the moment. Fires sputtered softly along their bank, and the glow reflected in their eyes, revealing both anticipation and wonder. The elders' whispered words floated on the still night air, telling tales of past winters when the river had been both a protector and a divider. The young listened closely, hearts attuned to the subtle lessons woven between caution and courage. The ice beneath the moonlight seemed to breathe. Faint cracks shimmered like delicate veins, carrying the memory of countless winters and the quiet pulse of life beneath. A gray-cliffed girl leaned forward, tracing one of the cracks with a gloved finger, feeling the tiny tremor beneath her palm. On the opposite bank, a Frost Spire boy mirrored her actions, fingertips brushing the ice with awe. Across the frozen expanse, their silent, mirrored movements created a delicate, unspoken connection, a tender conversation carried by frost and moonlight. A cold wind whispered through the pine trees, carrying the mingled scents of snow, smoke, and distant earth. It made the fires flicker and rustled the edges of cloaks, brushing against cheeks like a gentle caress. Somewhere in the distance, the soft cry of an owl cut through the quiet, echoing across the ice and reminding both tribes that they were not alone, that the world around them watched patiently, holding space for the delicate unfolding of this night. The elders, noticing the children's fascination, guided them in a quiet ritual, small offerings of pine, stones, and water placed at the edge of the ice, gestures meant to honor the river and acknowledge the day's fragile significance. Each action was slow, deliberate, and soothing, the rhythm of movement blending seamlessly with the hush of the winter night. In the glow of firelight and moonlight, the ice seemed to shimmer with approval, acknowledging the care, respect, and cautious hope carried across its frozen surface. And as the tribes leaned into the calm of night, a quiet thought lingered in every mind. The river was not a wall, not tonight. It was a space of possibility, a living bridge waiting for courage, patience, and the gentle unfolding of trust. The world felt suspended in this delicate balance where silence, frost, and intention met, creating a moment both fleeting and eternal. The moon climbed higher, spilling its pale, serene light across the frozen river, turning every frost-covered branch and ridge of ice into a silvered, crystalline outline. The night was hushed, wrapped in a soft stillness that seemed to slow time itself. On the gray cliff bank, the elders moved quietly among the children, their voices low, soothing, almost like lullabies carried on the wind. Each movement was deliberate. Hands brushed snow from cloaks, fingers traced subtle patterns in the frost, and small gestures of comfort and guidance grounded the young in both safety and anticipation. Across the river, the Frostspire tribe mirrored these gestures. Elders guided the children through silent rituals, marking paths on the ice with small stones and sprinklings of snow. The faint glow of their fires mingled with the moonlight, casting a gentle warmth that seemed to pulse with the slow rhythm of the river itself. Young ones leaned close, their breath misting in the cold, eyes wide with wonder as they absorbed the delicate choreography unfolding before them. Every movement felt significant, every gesture purposeful, and every whisper carried weight. The ice itself seemed alive in this quiet moonlit hour. Faint cracks traced themselves like veins beneath the surface, delicate and glimmering, almost as if the river were tracing the history of the tribes upon its frozen skin. A gray cliff boy knelt at the edge, pressing a gloved palm to the ice and feeling the subtle vibrations beneath him. Mirroring him on the Frostspire side, a young girl did the same, her fingertips trembling with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and wonder. For a fleeting moment across the silvered expanse, the ice connected them in a silent, almost sacred dialogue. The wind drifted softly across the frozen river, carrying the mingled scents of pine, smoke, and distant earth. The hushed call of a distant owl punctuated the stillness, and the branches of the surrounding forest swayed gently, releasing tiny showers of snow that shimmered in the moonlight. The tribes listened and watched, feeling the subtle rhythm of life that pulsed quietly beneath the ice, a reminder that patience, respect, and courage were all part of the same delicate pattern. The elders spoke in soft tones, their words deliberate and slow, weaving stories of winters past, of rivers that had both divided and united, of courage and humility, and of the fragile hope that lived within even the coldest days. The children listened, absorbing the rhythm of the words as much as the meaning, feeling the slow pull of anticipation that wound itself gently around their hearts. As the night deepened, the frozen river seemed to hold its breath along with the tribes. The air was heavy with the quiet magic of possibility, each sound amplified in the hush, the soft crackle of distant fires, the gentle shift of snow, the faint tremor of ice beneath cautious steps. And in that still, silvered moment, both tribes felt the same unspoken truth. The frozen river, patient and vigilant, was ready to witness something new, something fragile, yet profound, begin to unfold. The moonlight grew softer, casting a tranquil glow across the frozen river as the night deepened into its quiet hours. Frost shimmered along the edges of the ice, sparkling like scattered diamonds, and every shadow seemed stretched and softened, draping the world in a gentle hush. On the gray cliff side, the elders moved with deliberate care, guiding the children along narrow paths traced carefully on the snow. Each step was measured, every motion slow, ensuring that the fragile ice beneath them would bear their weight, and that the rhythm of respect and patience remained unbroken. Across the river, the Frostspire tribe echoed the same gentle rhythm. Women adjusted cloaks and furs, guiding the young with soft whispers, while men traced patterns on the snow-laden ice, leaving delicate marks that told stories of generations past. The firelight from their small hearths flickered softly, reflecting off the ice like distant stars, casting a quiet, warming glow that softened the crispness of the night air. Children leaned close, watching the elders' hands, tracing the intricate motions and absorbing the quiet lessons woven into each gesture. The ice beneath the river responded subtly to the night's calm. Thin, silvered cracks glimmered faintly, spreading delicately beneath the surface, whispering of the current flowing far below. A Greycliff boy knelt, pressing a gloved hand against the cold, feeling the pulse of the river beneath him. Across the expanse, a Frostspire girl mirrored his motion, fingertips trembling slightly as they traced the same vein of ice. The two ripples of touch, separated by the frozen expanse, seemed to meet in a tender, wordless dialogue, as though the river itself had stitched a small thread of connection between them. A gentle wind rustled the surrounding pine trees, carrying the faint scents of wood smoke, pine, and snow. Tiny flakes drifted lazily, settling softly on cloaks, hair, and the edges of the ice. The wind's whisper carried across the frozen river like a lullaby, drawing the tribes further into the stillness, into the delicate balance of caution and curiosity. Every sound, the faint groan of shifting ice, the crackle of a distant fire, the soft whisper of breath, was amplified in the hush of night, creating a quiet symphony of winter that wrapped both tribes in a shared awareness. The elders' voices rose briefly in soft song, a low, rhythmic chant that seemed to echo across the frozen expanse. It was a song of patience, of courage, of hope, resonating with the subtle heartbeat of the ice itself. The children leaned closer, absorbing the cadence, feeling the weight and beauty of the moment press gently against their hearts. In this quiet hour, the river became more than frozen water. It was a living space, a witness, a bridge poised between hesitation and the first small steps toward connection. And as the night deepened, both tribes felt it quietly, almost imperceptibly. The frozen river, patient and enduring, was ready to hold more than frost and silence. It was ready to carry the first whispers of reconciliation, the gentle stirrings of trust, and the slow, delicate beginnings of something profoundly new. The night air had grown even colder, yet there was a serene clarity in its chill, as though the winter itself had hushed to watch. The moon hovered high above, pale and luminous, spilling silver across the frozen river and highlighting every delicate crack and shimmer in the ice. On the gray cliff side, the elders had gathered in a small circle near the edge, their voices low, carrying soft chants that seemed to merge with the subtle groans of the ice. The children huddled nearby, their eyes wide, hearts thrumming gently with the quiet thrill of anticipation and wonder. Across the river, Frost's spire mirrored the reverent stillness. The elders traced patterns in the frost with their fingertips, shaping tiny symbols of respect and remembrance. The children crouched low, copying the gestures, letting their own hands glide across the ice as if learning the language of patience itself. Fires sputtered softly, casting a warm glow that mingled with the cold moonlight, painting both tribe and ice in a gentle tapestry of silver and amber. The ice beneath the river trembled faintly, a subtle vibration that traveled slowly from one bank to the other. A gray cliff girl pressed her palm to a thin crack, feeling the subtle pulse beneath her glove. Across the river, a Frostspire boy traced the same vein, fingertips brushing the surface with gentle reverence. For a fleeting moment, their motions synchronized, and the ice seemed to hum softly in acknowledgement, a delicate bridge uniting them without a single spoken word. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of pine, smoke, and the frozen river itself. Tiny snowflakes drifted lazily, landing softly on cloaks and hair, sparkling in the moonlight like scattered starlight. The sound of distant branches creaking, the low murmur of shifting ice, and the faint crackle of fire formed a quiet symphony that enveloped both tribes. Every sense seemed heightened, each small sound and movement carrying significance, binding the watchers to the river, to each other, and to the fragile promise of the night. Elders on both sides spoke in whispers, words of caution and encouragement, reminding the young of the slow path of trust and the delicate balance between courage and patience. The children listened intently, absorbing not just the meaning, but the rhythm and intention behind every motion and every word. The frozen river, once a silent, impassable boundary, now felt alive, responsive, and patient, holding space for the unfolding moment and for the seeds of understanding that were beginning to take root in tiny, unspoken ways. As the night deepened further, shadows stretched across the glimmering ice, softening into silver gradients, and the river seemed to hum along with the slow, deliberate heartbeat of the tribes. The moonlight, wind, and frost together wove a tapestry of calm anticipation, carrying a quiet truth. Tonight, the ice is more than frozen water. It is a bridge, a witness, and a gentle promise that something new, tender, and hopeful is beginning to awaken. The night deepened into a quiet, almost sacred stillness, with the frozen river stretching like a silver ribbon under the pale moonlight. A faint fog rose from the ice where the subtle warmth of the land met the frozen surface, curling in delicate, ghost-like tendrils that drifted slowly across the expanse. On the gray cliff bank, the elders moved with calm precision, arranging small stones and pieces of pine along the edge of the river. Each placement was deliberate, a silent message of care, respect, and anticipation. The children crouched nearby, watching, learning and imitating the gentle motions, their small hands leaving faint impressions on the snow-covered ground. Across the river, the Frostspire tribe mirrored this slow, careful ritual. Elders whispered instructions as they guided their young, tracing paths on the ice with delicate fingers and soft-tipped sticks. Fires flickered softly behind them, their warm glow blending with the pale moonlight, casting gentle amber reflections on the icy expanse. The children's breaths rose in little clouds, drifting above the surface like tiny clouds of hope, mingling with the faint mist curling across the frozen river. Beneath the ice, currents whispered and shifted subtly, carrying a quiet, unperceivable energy that threaded between the two tribes. A faint crack ran along the surface, glimmering like a silver vein under the moon's gaze. A gray cliff boy pressed a gloved hand to it, feeling a delicate shiver that traveled slowly through the ice. On the Frostspire side, a young girl did the same, her fingers trembling slightly as the tiny vibration pulsed beneath her. In that moment, across the frozen expanse, they shared a silent understanding, a connection that words could not capture, delicate as frost and twice as fleeting. The wind carried the scent of smoke, pine, and distant earth, stirring the branches of the surrounding forest. Tiny snowflakes drifted down lazily, sparkling in the moonlight before settling on fire-lit faces and the icy surface of the river. The world seemed suspended in a soft hush where time slowed, and every small sound, the faint groan of shifting ice, the whisper of a child's breath, the crackle of distant fire, became a thread in a larger, invisible tapestry. The elders began to hum low, steady tones that vibrated through the air and seemed to resonate with the rhythm of the river itself. Their voices were a gentle anchor, grounding the young ones and echoing across the expanse of ice. The children leaned in, mesmerized, feeling the slow, deliberate cadence of care, reverence, and hope. The frozen river, patient and enduring, seemed to respond, carrying not just weight, but meaning, bridging fear and trust, distance and connection, in a way that felt almost sacred. And as the night held them in its quiet embrace, both tribes sensed it. The ice was no longer just a barrier. It was a living witness to the small, careful steps being taken, a keeper of fragile hope, and a gentle reminder that even the coldest divides could one day carry warmth. The night had grown deeper now, a soft cloak of silver and shadow draping the frozen river. Stars sparkled faintly in the pale sky, their reflections dancing across the ice like scattered jewels. On the gray cliff side, the elders moved with careful precision, their hands tracing patterns in the snow and ice, leaving symbols that spoke of respect, patience, and the slow cultivation of trust. Children followed quietly, mimicking the gestures, their small fingers pressing lightly into frost and snow, leaving delicate impressions that would vanish with the shifting ice or melt of dawn. Across the river, the Frostspire tribe mirrored the same careful rhythm. Fires glimmered softly behind them, casting warm amber light on fur-lined cloaks and frozen ground. Elders guided the young ones in gentle rituals, whispering instructions and weaving stories into each movement, teaching them not just the actions, but the meaning behind them. The children's faces glowed with a mixture of awe and cautious excitement, their eyes reflecting both firelight and moonlight as they absorbed the quiet gravity of the night. The ice beneath them seemed alive, responding in subtle ways. Thin cracks traced delicate, glimmering lines across its surface, each one humming faintly as if carrying the memories of winters long past. A Greycliff girl knelt, resting her gloved hand on a crack, feeling the gentle vibration pulsing beneath her fingers. Across the river, a Frostspire boy mirrored her motion, fingertips brushing along a parallel fissure. In that mirrored movement, there was a delicate communion, unspoken yet unmistakable, as though the ice itself had stitched a fragile thread of connection between the two. A soft wind drifted across the river, carrying the mingled scents of pine, smoke, and snow. Tiny snowflakes twirled lazily, drifting onto cloaks and hair, landing softly on the ice. Every subtle sound, the faint groan of the river beneath the frozen surface, the whisper of a child's breath, the crackle of firewood, resonated in the still night air, creating a quiet symphony that wrapped both tribes in its gentle embrace. The elders' chants grew slightly more pronounced, low, steady, and rhythmic, blending seamlessly with the faint hum of the ice. Their voices carried across the frozen expanse, each syllable deliberate, a reminder of patience, respect, and the quiet courage required to bridge the distance between the tribes. The children leaned closer, listening, absorbing the cadence, and feeling the delicate weight of hope settle softly in their hearts. As the night pressed on, the frozen river no longer felt like a boundary. It had become a living space, a witness to the careful, deliberate actions of the tribes, and a conduit for possibility. Beneath the cold surface, currents moved with patient persistence, carrying whispers of change, connection, and the gentle promise that one day this ice might hold not just separation, but understanding and reconciliation. The late-night air carried a profound stillness, heavy with frost and quiet expectation. Moonlight spilled across the frozen river in a soft silver wash, illuminating every crack, ridge, and ripple of ice with delicate clarity. On the Greycliff side, the elders moved in a slow, purposeful rhythm, their hands gently brushing snow from cloaks, adjusting small offerings of pine and stone, and guiding the children in the patient repetition of ritual gestures. Each motion was deliberate, a meditation on respect, humility, and the fragile hope that tonight might hold something extraordinary. Across the river, the Frostspire tribe mirrored this gentle choreography. The fires behind them glowed softly, casting elongated shadows across the snow and ice. Elders whispered instructions, teaching the children the meaning of careful steps, the rhythm of measured patience, and the subtle language of trust. The young ones moved with reverence, tracing delicate lines in the frost, scattering snow, and placing small stones in patterns that mirrored the elders' intentions. Their tiny actions were quiet prayers, small movements woven into the larger, unfolding story of the night. Beneath the frozen surface, the river hummed faintly, carrying a subtle vibration that traced the length of the ice. A Greycliff boy pressed a gloved hand against a thin, glimmering crack and felt the gentle pulse of the river's hidden current. Across the ice, a Frostspire girl mirrored the motion, fingertips trembling with awe as they traced a parallel fissure. In that mirrored moment, separated by distance but united by intent, the two children shared an unspoken connection, fragile yet powerful, carried silently by the ice itself. The wind whispered through the surrounding pine trees, stirring tiny flurries of snow that drifted across the frozen river. Every sound, soft creaks of shifting ice, distant bird calls, the faint crackle of fires, was amplified in the stillness, creating a subtle symphony that wove together north and south. The world seemed suspended, every detail intensified, and every small gesture held meaning beyond its immediate presence. The elders' low chants blended with the gentle hum of the ice, creating a resonance that seemed to settle into the bones and hearts of all who listened. The children leaned closer, absorbing the cadence, feeling the weight of history and hope intertwine in the quiet rhythm. The frozen river had transformed from barrier to bridge, a living, breathing witness to the patience, courage, and reverence of the tribes. And in this tranquil, silvered night, a quiet truth whispered through the hearts of both tribes. The ice was more than frost and snow. It was a keeper of possibility, a subtle guide toward connection, and a gentle promise that, with patience and courage, even the coldest divides could one day carry warmth and understanding. The deep night wrapped the frozen river in a soft, crystalline silence, broken only by the faint groan of shifting ice and the whisper of wind through distant pine branches. Moonlight poured across the expanse, casting long, delicate shadows that stretched and bent over ridges and cracks, turning the ice into a shimmering tapestry of silver and shadow. On the gray cliff side, the elders moved with slow, deliberate care, adjusting small piles of pine, stone, and offerings along the river's edge. Each gesture was intentional, a lesson in patience and reverence, and the children followed quietly, their small movements echoing the adults' rhythm, careful not to disturb the delicate balance of ice and ritual. Across the river, Frost's spire mirrored the gentle choreography. The elders traced faint patterns in the snow with soft-tipped sticks, guiding the children to follow, leaving quiet marks on the frozen surface. Fires flickered behind them, casting a gentle amber glow that mingled with the moonlight, warming the scene with light rather than heat. The children leaned close, eyes wide with wonder, feeling the rhythm of the elders' gestures, absorbing not only their instructions, but the calm authority and quiet intention behind every movement. The ice beneath the river carried a subtle pulse, a vibration so gentle it could almost be mistaken for imagination. A gray cliff boy pressed his gloved hand onto a thin crack, feeling the faint shiver that traced along its length. Across the expanse, a Frostspire girl mirrored the gesture, her fingers trembling slightly as she traced the same fissure. In that silent, mirrored motion, the river itself seemed to hum in quiet acknowledgement, connecting the two children and through them the tribes in a delicate, invisible thread of shared awareness. The wind drifted lazily, carrying scents of pine, smoke, and snow, and stirring tiny flakes that twirled like fragile dancers before settling on cloaks, hair, and the glimmering ice. Every subtle sound, the gentle crack of ice, the murmur of breathing, the soft crackle of firewood, resonated with clarity, as if amplified by the hush of night. The children noticed, their senses heightened, and in their wide-eyed fascination, they felt the gentle intimacy of a world that demanded patience, respect, and careful attention. The elders' low chants rose and fell like waves, a soft, steady rhythm that seemed to harmonize with the ice and wind. Each word was deliberate, a quiet thread woven into the fabric of the night, carrying lessons of courage, patience, and fragile hope. The frozen river, once a rigid, impassable divide, had become a witness to the slow, gentle choreography of connection, holding space for gestures, for touch, and for the soft stirrings of trust that threaded silently between north and south. And as the night deepened, both tribes felt a subtle, shared certainty. The ice was alive not only with frost and cold, but with possibility. It could hold the weight of patience, reverence, and courage. It could carry the beginnings of understanding. And tonight, under the quiet gaze of the moon, that potential hovered delicately, waiting for the next careful step. A thin veil of fog drifted above the frozen river, curling in soft, swirling ribbons that glimmered in the pale moonlight. The night was hushed, the kind of silence that deepened the sense of possibility, making every sound, every groan of ice, every whisper of wind, resonate with significance. On the gray cliff side, the elders moved slowly, carefully adjusting small offerings of pine, stones, and water along the river's edge. Each gesture was precise, deliberate, a ritual in motion, and the children watched intently, mimicking the motions with gentle reverence, feeling the weight of the night settle softly over them. Across the river, Frost Spire mirrored this slow choreography. Elders traced delicate patterns in the snow, teaching the young ones the subtle rhythm of patience and respect. Fires flickered softly behind them, casting gentle amber light that mingled with the moon's glow, creating a tapestry of silver and warmth across the ice. The children moved cautiously, following their elders' guidance, letting each step and motion be measured and meaningful. Beneath the frozen surface, the river murmured faintly, carrying subtle vibrations that traced along the ice like quiet whispers. A gray cliff boy knelt and pressed his gloved hand to a thin crack, feeling the gentle shiver beneath. On the Frost Spire side, a young girl mirrored the gesture, fingertips tracing a parallel fissure. In that silent, mirrored movement, the ice became a conduit, a fragile, unspoken bridge connecting the two children, and through them, the two tribes, in a shared moment of wonder and tentative connection. The wind drifted softly, carrying the mingled scents of pine, smoke, and frost. Tiny snowflakes twirled lazily in the air, drifting onto cloaks, hair, and the shimmering ice below. Every subtle sound, the groan of shifting ice, the whisper of breathing, the faint crackle of fire, was amplified in the hush of night, forming a gentle symphony that enveloped both tribes, drawing them further into the stillness of this sacred hour. The elders' low chants rose and fell, slow and steady, in harmony with the faint vibration of the ice. Each syllable seemed to anchor patience, reverence, and hope into the frozen landscape. The children leaned closer, absorbing the cadence, letting the rhythm settle in their chests, feeling the weight of history and the delicate promise of the night. The frozen river was no longer just a barrier. It had become a living witness, a bridge, a silent guide toward understanding, and as the night lingered on, both tribes sensed it. Beneath the cold and frost, the river was ready to carry hope, courage, and the beginnings of trust. The ice, patient and enduring, seemed to hum softly, waiting for the careful, deliberate steps that would shape a new path across its frozen expanse. The moon now hung high and full above the frozen river, casting a soft, silvery glow that made every ridge, crack, and frost-covered twig gleam like delicate crystal. The air was still and cold, yet heavy with the quiet electricity of anticipation. On the gray cliff side, the elders moved with calm authority, guiding the children through careful motions along the snow-dusted ice. Their hands brushed lightly over offerings of pine and stones, arranging them with intentionality. Each gesture carried weight, a whisper of patience and reverence, and the children followed with quiet attentiveness, their small fingers leaving fleeting marks in the frost that spoke of learning and respect. Across the river, the Frost Spire tribe mirrored these slow, deliberate movements. Fires flickered softly behind them, throwing warm, dancing shadows across the ice. Elders traced patterns with gentle sweeps of their hands, while the children followed, pressing sticks into the frost to leave small, intricate designs. The quiet crackle of fire and the soft hum of the elders' chants blended seamlessly with the night stillness, creating a tapestry of sound and light that held the river in gentle focus. Beneath the ice, subtle vibrations traveled like quiet currents, connecting the two banks in ways unseen but deeply felt. A Greycliff girl knelt, her gloved hand tracing the delicate fissures, feeling the tremor pulse beneath her fingertips. On the frost spire side, a boy mirrored her motion, fingertips brushing a similar crack. Across the frozen expanse, their mirrored gestures formed an unspoken conversation, a tender, wordless communion carried by the living ice. The river itself seemed to acknowledge their connection, shimmering faintly, a subtle pulse threading through the frozen expanse. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the mingled scents of snow, smoke, and distant earth. Tiny snowflakes drifted lazily, settling softly on cloaks, hair, and the ice, glittering in the moonlight like fleeting stars. Every small sound, the faint groan of ice beneath weight, the subtle whisper of breath, the crackle of fire, was amplified in the hush, creating a quiet symphony that wrapped both tribes in a shared awareness. The elders' low chants rose and fell with steady rhythm, harmonizing with the gentle pulse of the ice. Each word carried lessons of courage, humility, and patience, reminding the young that even the coldest divides could bear witness to hope. The frozen river had become a living space, holding the careful gestures of two tribes and nurturing the faint stirrings of connection. As the night deepened, both tribes felt the river's quiet message. The ice was patient, it was enduring, and it could carry more than separation. Beneath its frozen surface, it was ready to hold trust, understanding, and the first delicate steps toward reconciliation. And in that silvered stillness, the promise of tomorrow lingered, waiting to be realized. The night had grown colder still, and the frozen river stretched in quiet majesty beneath the pale glow of the full moon. Frost glimmered like scattered diamonds along every crack and ridge, and a gentle mist rose from the surface, curling slowly in the calm air. On the Greycliff side, the elders moved with deliberate care, their hands adjusting small offerings and guiding the children in soft, precise gestures. Each motion carried the weight of ritual, the intention of patience, and the careful nurturing of hope. The children imitated their elders with quiet reverence, their breaths misting in the cold air as they traced subtle patterns in the snow. Across the river, Frostspire mirrored this rhythm. Fires flickered softly, casting warm amber pools of light that mingled with the cold moonlight. Elders traced intricate patterns along the ice, guiding the young to follow, their hands steady, voices soft, weaving lessons into each movement. The children's faces reflected both wonder and focus, eyes wide as they absorbed not only the instructions, but the quiet reverence underlying every gesture. Each careful action became part of a larger tapestry, one that bridged past, present, and the possibility of connection across the frozen expanse. Beneath the ice, faint currents whispered along hidden channels, carrying a subtle, almost imperceptible vibration. A Greycliff boy knelt at the edge, pressing a gloved palm to a thin crack, feeling the pulse beneath him. Across the river, a Frostspire girl mirrored his action, fingertips tracing a parallel fissure. The mirrored motions, though separated by distance, felt synchronized, as though the river itself was stitching a delicate thread between them. In that quiet communion, the ice became more than frozen water. It was a living witness, a bridge, and a vessel of possibility. The wind moved softly through the surrounding pines, carrying the mingled scents of snow, pine, and smoke. Tiny snowflakes drifted like fragile dancers, settling on hair, cloaks, and ice, sparkling in the moonlight. The ambient sounds, the faint groan of shifting ice, the whisper of breath, the subtle crackle of distant fires, merged into a gentle symphony, enveloping both tribes in the hush of night and drawing them further into its calm, meditative rhythm. The elders' low chants rose and fell, steady and melodic, blending with the subtle pulse of the ice. Each word reinforced the lessons of courage, patience, and reverence, weaving an invisible bond between the children, the elders, and the river itself. The frozen river, once a boundary, now felt like a living participant, holding the collective intention of two tribes as they moved carefully through this sacred night. And as the night deepened, both tribes felt a quiet, shared understanding. Beneath the frozen surface, the river was alive with possibility. It could carry not just the weight of footsteps, but the beginnings of trust, connection, and hope. And in that serene, silvered stillness, the promise of a new day shimmered gently, waiting for the careful, deliberate steps that would finally allow the ice to bear witness to unity. The moon had climbed to its zenith, spilling pale silver across the frozen river and painting the snow in a gentle, ethereal glow. Every crack and ridge in the ice caught the light, sparkling like tiny stars strewn across a quiet, slumbering world. On the gray cliff side, the elders moved with deliberate calm, their hands tracing familiar patterns in the frost and adjusting the small offerings of pine, stone, and water along the river's edge. The children followed closely, kneeling and bending to imitate each motion, their breaths rising in soft clouds that mingled with the faint mist drifting across the ice. Across the river, Frostspire mirrored the serene, rhythmic motions. Fires glimmered behind them, casting warm, flickering light that mingled with the cold, moonlit silver, creating a tapestry of gentle contrasts across the frozen expanse. The elders whispered softly, guiding the children through each motion, each gesture steeped in careful attention and reverent intention. The young ones moved slowly, deliberately tracing patterns in the snow and ice, leaving marks that shimmered in the moonlight, symbols of patience, respect, and hope. The ice beneath the river trembled softly, responding to the quiet energy that hovered over the night. A gray cliff boy pressed a gloved hand to a thin crack, feeling a subtle vibration that pulsed beneath his fingers. On the Frostspire side, a young girl mirrored the gesture, fingertips tracing a similar fissure. Across the silent expanse, their mirrored actions created an unspoken bridge, fragile and delicate, yet undeniable. The ice seemed to recognize their intention, humming faintly, a subtle acknowledgement of the small but meaningful steps toward connection. The wind drifted lazily through the surrounding pines, carrying the mingled scents of snow, pine, and smoke. Tiny snowflakes twirled down from the dark sky, landing softly on cloaks, hair, and the ice itself, sparkling like fleeting starlight. Every subtle sound, the groan of the river beneath the ice, the whisper of breath, the faint crackle of distant fires, was heightened in the hushed night, forming a quiet symphony that enveloped both tribes in a shared awareness of the river's presence and power. The elders' low, rhythmic chants rose and fell, harmonizing with the faint pulse of the ice. Each word carried lessons of courage, humility, and patience, reinforcing the delicate balance that held the tribes together in the hush of night. The frozen river, once a boundary, now felt like a living participant, an observer, a guide, and a silent keeper of possibility. And as the night deepened, both tribes sensed it with quiet certainty. The river, patient and enduring, could carry more than separation. Beneath its frozen surface, it could hold trust, hope, and the beginnings of reconciliation. In the gentle, silvered stillness, the promise of tomorrow shimmered softly, ready to be nurtured by the careful, deliberate steps that the tribes were slowly, reverently taking. The night had deepened into a serene, almost sacred calm, with the frozen river stretched like a silver ribbon beneath the pale moonlight. Mist curled lazily above the ice, soft and delicate, catching the light in fleeting glimmers. On the gray cliff side, the elders moved with deliberate precision, their hands arranging small offerings of pine, stone, and carefully gathered water along the riverbank. Each motion was slow and thoughtful, each step measured, carrying a silent reverence that the children mirrored with quiet concentration. Every soft footfall, every gentle gesture seemed to merge seamlessly with the hush of the winter night. Across the river, Frostspire reflected the same rhythm. Fires flickered gently behind the tribe, throwing soft amber light onto the snow and ice. Elders traced faint patterns in the frost, guiding the children in meticulous movements. The young ones followed with quiet care, pressing sticks into the snow, leaving transient marks that glimmered under moonlight. Each action carried weight, teaching patience and respect, and reinforcing the delicate balance that existed between effort and stillness, between courage and caution. Beneath the ice, subtle vibrations moved along hidden currents, a gentle murmur that hinted at the life flowing silently beneath the frozen surface. A gray cliff boy pressed a gloved hand onto a thin, shimmering crack, feeling the pulse beneath. Across the river, a Frostspire girl mirrored the gesture, fingertips tracing a parallel fissure. In that quiet, synchronized motion, the ice became a silent bridge, a subtle connector between two young hearts, and through them between two tribes cautiously reaching toward one another. The wind rustled through the surrounding pines, carrying scents of snow, smoke, and pine resin. Tiny snowflakes drifted lazily, settling softly on cloaks, hair, and the ice below. Every delicate sound, the faint groan of the shifting ice, the whisper of breath, the crackle of firewood, seemed amplified in the still night, forming a gentle, natural symphony that enveloped both tribes in shared awareness and quiet wonder. The elders' low, rhythmic chants rose and fell, harmonizing with the subtle hum of the ice beneath them. Each word spoke of patience, courage, and humility, weaving an invisible thread between the two tribes. The frozen river had become more than a boundary. It was a living participant, a silent witness, a holder of the fragile beginnings of trust and understanding. And as the night lingered, both tribes sensed a quiet truth. The river, patient and enduring, could carry the weight of hope, of cautious connection, and of the slow, deliberate steps toward reconciliation. Beneath its frozen surface, the promise of unity shimmered, waiting to be honored and nurtured in the careful movements of the night. The moon now rested high, casting a serene, silvery glow across the frozen river, turning every ridge, crack, and frost-covered branch into a delicate, luminous pattern. The night was still, yet it felt alive, each whisper of wind and subtle groan of ice carrying weight and significance. On the gray cliff side, the elders moved with deliberate care, adjusting small offerings of pine, stones, and water, and guiding the children in the ritual movements they had practiced throughout the night. Each motion was slow, purposeful, and meditative, like a quiet dance performed in harmony with the frozen landscape. Across the river, Frost's spire mirrored the ceremony. Fires flickered softly, casting gentle amber light over the snow and ice, mingling with the moon's glow. Elders traced patterns in the frost with soft-tipped sticks, guiding the children to leave delicate, fleeting marks. Each gesture was both instruction and blessing, teaching patience, respect, and the quiet courage required to honor the frozen river. The children moved with reverence, their tiny breaths rising in soft clouds, mingling with the drifting mist that hovered above the ice. Beneath the frozen surface, faint currents shifted and murmured, carrying subtle vibrations along hidden paths. A Greycliff boy knelt at a thin crack, gloved fingers pressing gently against the ice, feeling the pulse beneath him. On the Frostspire side, a girl mirrored his actions, tracing a parallel fissure. Across the silent expanse, their mirrored gestures became a wordless conversation, a delicate connection that the river itself seemed to recognize and hold carefully between the two tribes. The wind drifted lazily through the pine trees, carrying scents of pine smoke and fresh snow. Tiny snowflakes descended, sparkling in the moonlight, settling softly on cloaks, hair, and the glimmering ice below. Every sound, the subtle groan of shifting ice, the whisper of breath, the crackle of distant firewood, resonated in the hushed night, forming a gentle symphony that wrapped both tribes in quiet contemplation and shared awareness. The elders' low chants rose and fell with rhythmic cadence, blending seamlessly with the subtle hum of the ice. Each syllable spoke of courage, patience, and hope, embedding the quiet promise of trust into the frozen landscape. The river, once an impassable divide, had become a silent witness, a living participant, and a delicate bridge, holding space for both tribes and the beginnings of connection that slowly unfolded with each careful gesture. And as the night deepened, both tribes felt the same fragile certainty. The frozen river was no longer just ice and snow. It was alive with potential. It could carry the weight of hope, trust, and unity. Beneath its surface, currents moved patiently, waiting for the deliberate, reverent steps that would allow the tribes to finally reach toward one another. The late night was hushed, the frozen river stretching silently beneath the soft, silver light of the moon. Mist curled in gentle spirals above the ice, catching the pale glow and turning the air into a delicate, ethereal haze. On the Greycliff side, the elders moved with careful deliberation, arranging small stones, pine sprigs, and offerings of water along the riverbank. Their movements were slow, rhythmic, and deliberate, a meditative dance that the children watched and mirrored with gentle reverence. Each gesture carried a quiet lesson in patience, respect, and careful intent, and every small step left a fleeting trace upon the pristine snow. Across the river, the Frostspire tribe followed the same deliberate rhythm. Fires flickered softly behind them, sending warm amber reflections onto the snow and ice, merging with the cold moonlight. Elders guided the children in tracing delicate patterns on the frost, their hands moving in harmony with the subtle murmurs of the night. The children followed attentively, leaving temporary impressions in the snow that shimmered like tiny constellations under the moon's glow. Every movement, no matter how small, seemed infused with meaning, teaching lessons that went beyond words. Beneath the ice, currents whispered along hidden channels, carrying subtle vibrations that traveled beneath the surface from one bank to the other. A gray cliff girl pressed a gloved hand to a thin, glimmering crack, feeling the gentle tremor beneath her fingers. On the frost spire side, a boy mirrored her motion, fingertips tracing a parallel fissure. In that quiet, mirrored movement, the ice became a living bridge, carrying the first fragile threads of connection between the two tribes, a silent promise shared across the frozen expanse. The wind stirred softly through the pine trees, carrying the mingled scents of snow, pine, and smoke. Tiny flakes drifted slowly to the ground, landing on hair, cloaks, and the glittering ice below, each one catching the moonlight before settling into the quiet white expanse. Every subtle sound, the faint groan of shifting ice, the whisper of a breath, the soft crackle of fire, resonated in the still night, forming a gentle symphony that bound both tribes in a shared moment of awareness and anticipation. The elders' low chants rose and fell, steady and melodic, harmonizing with the soft hum of the ice. Each syllable carried lessons of courage, patience, and hope, reinforcing the invisible thread connecting both sides. The frozen river, once a boundary, now felt like a living participant, a silent witness to the deliberate and reverent steps taken toward trust. And as the night deepened further, both tribes felt it quietly in the hush and shimmer of the moonlit ice. The river was no longer just frozen water. It was alive with potential, ready to carry the weight of trust, hope, and the beginnings of unity. Beneath its surface, the currents held a quiet promise, waiting for the careful, deliberate steps that would allow the two tribes to reach toward one another. The night had reached a profound stillness, the kind that softened every sound and amplified every subtle movement. The frozen river stretched endlessly beneath the silver glow of the moon, each ridge and crack catching the light like delicate frost jewels. On the Great Cliff side, the elders moved with deliberate care, arranging pine, stones, and offerings of water with quiet precision. Each gesture was slow and meaningful, a meditation in motion, and the children followed attentively, leaving faint impressions in the snow that would soon fade but carried the weight of intention and respect. Across the river, Frost Spire mirrored this patient rhythm. Fires flickered softly behind them, casting gentle amber light that mingled with the moon's silvery glow, highlighting the children as they traced careful patterns along the frost. Elders whispered instructions, teaching them the subtle balance of caution and courage, of patience and movement, guiding their small hands in slow, deliberate gestures. Every mark, every gentle motion carried meaning, and the children moved with reverence, absorbing not only the instructions, but the quiet lessons embedded in each action. Beneath the ice, faint vibrations traveled along hidden currents, gentle pulses that seemed to mirror the rhythm of both tribes above. A gray cliff boy knelt at the edge of a crack, gloved fingers pressing lightly against the ice, feeling the delicate tremor beneath him. Across the frozen expanse, a Frost Spire girl mirrored his motion, fingertips tracing a parallel fissure. In that silent, synchronized gesture, the ice became a subtle bridge, a tender connection linking two young hearts and, through them, two cautious tribes. The wind drifted through the pines, carrying the mingled scents of smoke, snow, and pine. Tiny snowflakes floated lazily, settling softly on cloaks, hair, and ice, each one sparkling briefly in the moonlight. Every subtle sound, the groan of shifting ice, the whisper of breath, the crackle of distant firewood, resonated in the still night, forming a gentle, shared symphony. It pulled both tribes closer into the hush of the moment, deepening their awareness of the fragile magic beneath their feet. The elders' low chants rose and fell in steady, melodic cadence, harmonizing with the subtle pulse of the ice. Each word carried courage, humility, and hope, embedding the quiet promise of trust into the frozen landscape. The river, once a rigid boundary, had become a living witness, a bridge, and a delicate keeper of connection. And as the night lingered, both tribes felt it, in the soft shimmer of moonlight and the gentle hum beneath the ice. The river was no longer simply a frozen divide. It was alive with possibility, ready to carry the weight of reconciliation and the careful, reverent steps that would soon transform hesitation into fragile, luminous unity. The moon hovered high above, its pale light washing the frozen river in soft silver, illuminating every crack, ridge, and frost-laden branch with ethereal clarity. The night seemed suspended, a calm pause in the world, where every sound, the distant creak of shifting ice, the whisper of the wind, the soft murmur of breath, was amplified and carried significance. On the gray cliff side, elders moved with measured, deliberate grace, adjusting pines, stones, and small offerings along the riverbank. Their motions were slow, meditative, teaching the children not only how to place the items, but how to feel their meaning, the quiet reverence woven into every gesture. Across the river, the Frost-Spire tribe mirrored this same slow, deliberate rhythm. Fires flickered softly behind them, casting amber reflections across the ice that mingled with the moonlight. Elders traced patterns along the frost with gentle sweeps of their hands, guiding the children in careful movements. Each small action left delicate marks in the snow, glittering faintly like tiny constellations under the moon, teaching patience, balance, and the unspoken lessons of trust. The children moved with quiet attention, absorbing not only the instructions, but the sacred weight of the ritual itself. Beneath the frozen surface, hidden currents pulsed gently, carrying subtle vibrations along the river. A gray cliff boy knelt by a thin crack, gloved fingers pressing lightly against the ice, feeling the faint tremor beneath. Across the river, a Frost-Spire girl mirrored the motion, tracing a parallel fissure with soft, deliberate care. In that synchronized movement, the ice became a living, silent bridge, carrying connection, curiosity, and the first fragile stirrings of trust between the two tribes. The wind drifted softly through the pines, carrying the mingled scents of snow, pine, and smoke. Tiny snowflakes floated lazily, settling softly on cloaks, hair, and the shimmering ice. Every subtle sound, the faint groan of ice, the whisper of a child's breath, the crackle of distant fire, formed a gentle symphony that enveloped both tribes, creating a shared stillness that felt sacred, timeless, and delicate. The elders' chants rose and fell, steady and soothing, blending with the faint pulse beneath the ice. Each syllable carried courage, patience, and hope, threading a quiet, invisible connection between the two tribes. The frozen river, once a barrier, now felt alive, a witness, and a tender bridge, holding the careful, deliberate steps of all who moved along its edges. And as the night deepened, both tribes felt a quiet certainty in the hush. The river, patient and enduring, could carry more than separation. Beneath its frozen surface, it held trust, possibility, and the beginnings of unity. The air seemed to shimmer with anticipation, as if the river itself waited, ready to witness the fragile steps toward reconciliation and the first luminous bonds forming across the ice. The night had deepened into a profound, hushed serenity, and the frozen river stretched beneath the moon's gentle silver light, smooth in some places, cracked and ridged in others, each imperfection catching the glow like tiny shards of glass. On the gray cliff side, elders moved slowly, almost meditatively, adjusting small offerings of pine, stones, and water, each motion deliberate and weighted with intention. The children followed quietly, kneeling and bending, their hands leaving faint impressions on the snow, soft and fleeting, yet carrying the essence of patience and careful attention. Across the river, the frost-spired tribe mirrored these calm, reverent movements. Fires flickered softly behind them, throwing warm golden light onto the ice and blending with the moonlight, creating a delicate, ethereal palette across the frozen landscape. Elders traced intricate patterns in the frost, guiding the children in subtle, precise motions. Every gesture, every delicate mark left in the snow carried a lesson of caution, respect, and the quiet courage required to honor the night, the river, and the fragile possibility of connection. Beneath the ice, hidden currents pulsed gently, carrying faint vibrations along the frozen expanse. A gray cliff girl knelt at a thin crack, her gloved hand pressing lightly against the surface, sensing the tremor beneath her fingertips. On the opposite bank, a frost spire boy mirrored her movement, tracing a parallel fissure with the softest touch. Across the silent stretch of ice, the mirrored gestures formed a delicate, wordless bridge between the two children, and through them, a subtle, growing connection between the tribes themselves. The wind whispered softly through the surrounding pines, carrying the mingled scents of smoke, snow, and pine resin. Tiny snowflakes drifted slowly down, settling on cloaks, hair, and the icy river below, each catching the moonlight for a fleeting sparkle. Every sound, the faint creak of ice beneath weight, the gentle sigh of breath, the quiet crackle of distant firewood, seemed magnified in the stillness, forming a gentle shared symphony that drew both tribes further into the hush of the night. The elders' low rhythmic chants rose and fell, blending seamlessly with the subtle pulse of the ice. Each word carried patience, humility, and hope, embedding a quiet, invisible bond between the tribes. The frozen river, once a rigid barrier, had transformed into a living witness, a silent participant, a tender bridge that held the careful, deliberate steps of both sides. And in the soft, silvered stillness, both tribes sensed it. The river was no longer just a frozen divide. Beneath its surface, it held possibility, trust, and the beginnings of unity. The ice was patient, enduring, and ready to bear the weight of reconciliation, a luminous promise, waiting for the next careful steps to transform hesitation into connection. The night had settled into an almost sacred quiet, the frozen river stretching endlessly beneath the silver glow of the moon. Mist rose gently from its surface, curling into soft, swirling patterns that glimmered faintly, like wisps of smoke caught in moonlight. On the gray cliffside, the elders moved slowly, their hands brushing snow and adjusting small offerings of pine, stones, and water along the edge. Each motion was careful, deliberate, and imbued with reverence, a lesson in patience that the children followed with quiet, attentive movements, leaving soft, ephemeral marks in the snow. Across the river, frost spire mirrored the rhythm. Fires flickered gently behind the tribe, casting soft amber light that merged with the pale moonlight, illuminating the children as they traced delicate patterns in the frost under the guidance of the elders. Each gesture carried meaning beyond the motion itself, a lesson in trust, courage, and the quiet art of waiting. The children's eyes were wide, reflecting both firelight and moonlight, absorbing the lessons without a word, letting the stillness of the night speak for itself. Beneath the ice, subtle vibrations hummed along hidden currents. A gray cliff boy knelt at a faint crack, pressing a gloved hand against the ice and feeling the gentle tremor beneath him. Across the river, a frostspire girl mirrored the motion, tracing a parallel fissure. In that silent mirrored gesture, the ice became a bridge, a living conduit connecting the two young hearts, and through them, the tribes themselves. The frozen river seemed to hum softly in recognition, carrying their intention and cautious hope across its silvered surface. The wind drifted softly through the pines, bringing the mingled scents of pine, smoke, and fresh snow. Tiny snowflakes floated lazily through the air, settling on hair, cloaks, and the shimmering ice, sparkling briefly in the moonlight before disappearing into the white expanse. Every sound, the faint groan of shifting ice, the whisper of breath, the subtle crackle of firewood, formed a gentle symphony, binding the tribes in shared awareness and quiet anticipation. The elders' low chants rose and fell, slow and melodic, blending seamlessly with the soft pulse of the ice. Each syllable carried patience, courage, and hope, embedding a quiet, invisible bond into the frozen landscape. The river, once an unyielding boundary, had become a living witness, a tender bridge, holding space for the careful, deliberate steps of the tribes and the fragile beginnings of connection. And as the night deepened further, both tribes felt it. The frozen river was no longer just ice and snow. Beneath its surface lay the promise of unity, trust, and reconciliation, waiting to be realized through patience, courage, and careful, reverent steps. The hush of the night carried a quiet anticipation, the sense that the moment of bridging was approaching, delicate and luminous in the silver moonlight. The moon hung low, bathing the frozen river in a gentle, silver glow that made every ridge and fissure shimmer like liquid light. The night was profound in its stillness, so quiet that even the faintest sound, the soft groan of ice, the whisper of wind through pines, the gentle exhale of a child, carried weight and meaning. On the gray cliff side, the elders moved with deliberate care, adjusting pine, stones, and small offerings with hands that were steady, reverent, and mindful. The children mirrored them with quiet attention, their soft movements leaving transient traces in the frost, small gestures of learning, trust, and patience. Across the river, Frostspire echoed the calm precision. Fires flickered softly behind the tribe, casting warm light onto the snow and ice, mingling with the pale moonlight. Elders guided the children in tracing subtle patterns along the frost, their hands moving in slow, gentle sweeps. Each motion carried lessons of balance, courage, and cautious hope. The children moved with careful attention, every mark and gesture a quiet step toward understanding the sacred rhythm of the night. Beneath the frozen surface, hidden currents whispered in gentle pulses, vibrations that traced along the ice and linked the two banks. A gray cliff boy knelt at a thin crack, gloved fingers pressing lightly against the ice, feeling the faint tremor beneath. On the Frostspire side, a girl mirrored the gesture, fingertips tracing a parallel fissure. Across the frozen expanse, their synchronized movements became a silent bridge, connecting not just two children, but two tribes through the living, listening ice. The wind drifted through the pines, carrying the mingled scents of snow, smoke, and pine resin. Tiny snowflakes floated lazily, drifting down to settle softly on Cloak's hair and the shimmering ice. Every subtle sound, the faint creak of ice, the whisper of breath, the gentle crackle of fire formed a gentle symphony that drew both tribes into the hush of the night, a shared meditative awareness that transcended distance. The elders' chants rose and fell, slow, low, and resonant, blending seamlessly with the subtle pulse of the ice. Each syllable carried patience, courage, and hope, threading an invisible bond between the tribes. The river, once a boundary, had become a living witness, a silent participant, and a tender bridge, holding the deliberate, careful steps that both sides took toward one another. And in the quiet, silvered stillness, both tribes felt it with certainty. The frozen river, patient and enduring, could carry not only weight, but trust, hope, and the first luminous beginnings of unity. Tonight the ice would no longer divide. It would become a conduit, a keeper of fragile reconciliation, ready to bear witness to the promise of connection, finally fulfilled. The first pale hint of dawn began to touch the horizon, soft streaks of lavender and rose brushing gently against the silvered sky. The frozen river, long bathed in moonlight, now shimmered with the subtle glow of early morning, a bridge of ice that reflected the tentative warmth of a new day. On the gray cliffside, the elders moved slowly, guiding the children in the final, deliberate steps across the frozen expanse. Each footfall was careful, measured, a ritual of courage and trust, the weight of generations pressing lightly upon them, yet carried with reverent intention. Across the river, Frost's spire mirrored the movement. The children's breaths rose in gentle clouds, mingling with the morning mist as they stepped carefully onto the ice. Elders walked alongside them, whispering encouragement and steadying hands, their voices soft yet firm, echoing the lessons of patience, respect, and courage that had been woven through the night. The firelight behind them flickered, merging with the first light of day, bathing the scene in a gentle, golden silver glow. Beneath the ice, hidden currents pulsed faintly, carrying the energy of hope and connection along the frozen river. A Greycliff boy's hand reached out to a Frostspire girl's, fingers brushing, then clasping with delicate confidence. Across the ice, smiles bloomed on faces young and old, the unspoken understanding passing from heart to heart. In that luminous, fleeting moment, the river was no longer a barrier. It had become a witness, a participant, and a keeper of the fragile reconciliation that had taken a night to nurture and a lifetime to prepare for. The wind carried the scents of pine, smoke, and fresh snow, gentle and calming, and the tiny snowflakes that still drifted softly seemed to sparkle in celebration. Every subtle sound, the quiet crackle of ice, the soft exhale of breath, the distant murmurs of elders, blended into a serene symphony, a lullaby of unity and promise. The children laughed softly, their voices delicate and pure, harmonizing with the rhythm of the river, the wind, and the rising sun. As the two tribes met in the middle, the ice beneath them seemed to hum in quiet approval. Hands joined, eyes met, and the river carried not just their footsteps, but the weight of understanding, patience, and hope. Generations of caution, fear, and distance melted gently into shared warmth, and the frozen river, patient, enduring, luminous, bore witness to the fragile, breathtaking beauty of reconciliation. And as dawn fully embraced the world, a gentle hush settled over the river. The tribes lingered, feeling the quiet miracle of connection, the fragile joy of trust nurtured through patience and courage. The ice, once a barrier, had become a bridge, a testament to what can grow when hearts are willing to move carefully, reverently, and together. Thank you for staying with this story of the Gray Cliff and Frostspire tribes and their frozen river pact. May the calm, patient night and the gentle thaw of reconciliation bring a sense of peace and rest to your mind. Let the quiet courage and hope carried across the ice settle softly in your heart. If you enjoyed this journey, please like, subscribe, and comment, especially if you're watching from the US, Europe, or anywhere else, no matter the hour. Share what part of the story moved you the most, and carry the quiet magic of this frozen river into your own day or night. Now close your eyes, take a slow, deep breath, and let the story's stillness guide you into gentle rest.